But let's turn now to the ongoing violence in the Middle East. We're getting daily reports now of stabbings and Israeli crackdowns, and today more of the same on the West Bank. So is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict actually getting worse again? John Lyndon is Executive Director of OneVoice Europe, an international charity and membership organisation working with Israel and Palestine to achieve a two-state solution. He joins us live from our central London studio. John, thanks for joining us. Lots of people are starting to whisper it now in Israel-Palestine that a third intifada, some say it's started, some say it's on the way.
I mean, it has some similarities and differences to previous intifadas, and in many ways the category is slightly arbitrary, but one thing that is quite different in this instance is the lack of strategic leadership coming from the PLO or from any discernible Palestinians, which is worrying because it means that it's going to be very difficult for anybody to put this back in the bottle. And the vacuum of leadership, in fact, on both sides, particularly as extremist fringes seem to be rising in volume and anger, is one of the most worrying dynamics that we're seeing right now.
Well, that lack of leadership, I mean, in 2000 and 2001, the big accusation, not only from the Israelis, but from the whole world, was that the PLO was orchestrating all the violence, which the PLO actually denied. But perhaps this time round, whoever's orchestrating it has just gone to great pains to make sure that they are distanced from that, because it's apparently just youths randomly attacking Israeli civilians.
I think that's true. I don't see anyone's hand in this, to be very honest. And what's quite terrifying is that this is communal ethnic violence going on between Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs, living in the same land, who are fueled by their own nationalisms. And we can see with the disappearance of prospects for a two-state solution, a reality of a one-state nightmare emerging. And I think that's why it's so important for both sides to use the momentum, the terrible momentum that's been generated now, and try and channel it towards something diplomatic that can put both parties back onto a path towards two states.
The trouble is, that's also been said before, hasn't it? And each time the violence flares up, people make pleas to political entities on both sides to use this as a reason to come around the table again. But there's been nothing but distance between the Palestinians and the Israelis in terms of talks for the last 10 years or so. Absolutely no progress whatsoever. No maps are even being pulled out, let alone redrawn. So there has been no progress. And now we have a new generation on the Palestinian side who have grown up, another generation that's grown up in occupied land. And perhaps this is just the pressure being let off again.
I think that's true, and I think the reality of the ongoing occupation means this is going to keep happening. It's an unsustainable situation, and it's no good for Israelis and it's no good for Palestinians. The tragedy is it takes violence like this, in our experience, for the world to pay attention, particularly what's going on across the rest of the Middle East. And not wanting to sound cynical, what's going on right now should provide an impetus. Now, it's up to the leaders, and they're respectively on both sides quite weak leaders in their own ways. So it's up to the people to propel them and take advantage of the fact that people's minds are being focused internationally and locally, and we can't let this happen again to another generation of Israelis and Palestinians further down the road. And time is running out for two states. So even without this sort of violence, everybody who cares deeply about what's happening in that part of the world needs to have their minds focused, because we may not get another swing of the bat at this.
But we are still, aren't we, looking for muscle, political muscle somewhere to take the lead. We know that the Israeli leaders are always traditionally fearful of going too far, because one Prime Minister, of course, Yitzhak Rabin, paid with his life for that. The Palestinians have been taken away at the knees politically ever since Yasser Arafat moved on. So the Americans occasionally make forays in, and the quartet does, but no one seems to stay. No one seems to be able to survive the pressure to be able to bang heads together and start coming up with comments, let alone results.
I think that's true, and I think what we maybe need to look at is the regional dynamic overall. There are opportunities because of the dynamism we're seeing across the region to try a different kind of diplomacy. One thing that's very clear is that the old bilateral format that we've seen for the last 20 years, really, it's not working. So there needs to be an effort to try and rethink things, perhaps like the Madrid conference that we saw in the early 90s. And I think Israeli and Palestinian citizens, after the initial fear that both sides are feeling right now begins to subside, are going to demand some sort of action from their leaders. It's not enough for Israelis simply to ask for security measures to stem the violence, because ultimately there's no military solution to what we're seeing right now. It must be political. And for Palestinians as well, they need to put effective pressure upon their own leaders, upon the regional institutions, to say that we need your help. We need brave leadership. We need compromises by both sides. And we can't allow another generation of young Palestinians and Israelis to grow up in this sort of communal violence. And it's changing. The nature of the violence is becoming quite disturbing. Ordinary citizens turning on each other because of their ethnicity or religion. We've seen in other conflicts how this goes. And we need to make sure that we get this back in the bottle if that can be done.
Much has been made of the Islamification of Gaza, with Hamas taking control. There doesn't seem to be any sign on the West Bank that there's a religious atmosphere behind any of the violence. It's purely sectarian, is that right?
I would say it's mostly sectarian. Obviously, the accusations around the Al-Aqsa Mosque and some of the anger that's being generated introduces that religious dimension, which is incredibly dangerous. And I'd say on both sides, one of the trends we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is an increasing religiosity as a component of the conflict. It's an extremist minority inside both societies, but they can use sort of words that trigger emotional responses amongst people who are maybe less religiously observant or certainly less extreme. And what you're seeing is minorities, extremist minorities on both sides, fueled by religion and nationalism to some degree, dictating the terms of the conflict right now. And that's terrifying for the vast majority on both sides who have no interest in the sort of religious war that's being stoked up here.
John Lyndon, thanks very much indeed for joining us this evening here on Sky News.